Thank you, and welcome to today's Sun-sponsored webinar. Today's webinar topic, DSpace and Fedora, a collaboration update. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. During the question and answer session, please press star 1 on your touch-tone phone. Let me now turn the call over to our host, Mr. Art Pasquinelli. Thank you. You may begin.
Thank you. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining. I know some of you are just coming on as I'm speaking. So I want to take this opportunity to thank the speakers, Sandy and Michelle Kempton. And basically, it's the first effort we've made at this to have a joint collaborative discussion. And we've had a very good turnout. So well over 100 people are on the call today. There will be a Q&A afterward. And I think there's a lot of good content here. So I'm looking forward to this discussion, and we can go on as long as you want to via the chat room and the discussion. So welcome, Sandy and Michelle. And I am Art Pasquinelli, as the announcer said, and I'm the education market strategist at Sun, responsible for preservation, repositories, and digital libraries. And I've been doing this in and out of libraries for the last 14 years, but we've had a heavy focus on repositories the last 3 to 4 years. Let's see, I think the next slide would probably be most appropriate. What I want to go over here very quickly is what I'm seeing in the marketplace, since I do get a global view of what's going on. So we are seeing a massive growth in repositories, and that's occurring in state and federal archives, state and federal libraries, and a lot of the larger academic libraries globally. The types of content we're seeing are getting broader and broader. Initially, we were talking about digitized images and digitized books. Well, most of the discussions we're having today that they're looking at some technologies for, at least, are in the areas of e-science or e-research data sets, trying to build private infrastructure for these data sets to share them and keep them long-term. And they're very big, often very nuanced. There's a lot of long-tail data with some things being used all the time, some things being used rarely, that impinge or kind of dictate the architecture you want for your stories. So a lot of stuff is evolving right now. A lot of people are trying to figure out the economic and the technical model to sustain long-term repositories. We're also looking at enterprise repositories, and we've worked with both Michelle and Sandy in that effort with some of the universities, trying to connect the disparate repositories across campus, and that could be a mixture of DSpace, ePrints, and Fedora repositories, along with repositories that are contained in third-party applications. But the growth is definitely there, and the growth in the content and the growth in the types of content is very relevant today. We do see a very big subset of these repositories focused on long-term sustainability and preservation. So that's been a big focus for Sun over the last few years. How do you build a 5 petabyte repository and keep the data for 50 years? There's a lot of technical issues there. There's a lot of workflow issues. There's a lot of human issues that are entailed in that. So we are looking very deeply at that. And again, I see that as a subset. The preservation market is a subset of the repository market overall for Sun. The main things I'm seeing as far as trends, long-term sustainability, as I just mentioned, is a big discussion point. How do you keep data long-term? And how do you predict the scalability of the data? And how do you manage your own system and your human system to keep that data and the organization to keep the data for a long time? Secondly, we're talking very much about cloud computing, and this presentation will focus very much on what's going on with DSpace. But how do you do a service level agreement around cloud computing? How do you set the technical infrastructure? We're doing a lot with some of the main internet archiving entities and we'll be making some announcements in that area. We're working closely with both of these organizations, and we're trying to jump into cloud computing with both feet. And I do see the need growing to offer services that can be made available to smaller organizations and consortia, so they can avail themselves of cloud computing and offering a service to broaden the people using their content. Number three, there are applications that are tying into these Fedora and DSpace Foundation applications. You have things like Vital, Sales, for instance, but more value-added services and applications are being developed very rapidly now, both open source and third party. And then the demand for appliances and reference architectures. We hear that loud and clear from the Preservation Archive Special Interest Group membership that people want an easy to use box that they can use that's robust, scalable, standards-based, and open. And we are listening to the community there. So we are working with those Stan and Michelle's groups to develop reference architectures on clear boxes, small, medium, large boxes. I set up the Sun Preservation Archiving Special Interest Group with Mike Keller from Stanford a while back, about 2.5 years ago, and that's been it's been very well received. We have about 800 members. This webinar series is actually a lead-in to the next on-site meeting. The next on-site meeting will be June 24th to 26th in Malta. That's open to everybody. If you go to the website, you can sign up, or if you'd like to sign up for the organization, just send me an email at art.pasquinelli@sun.com. Instead of signing everybody up that's registered here, I'd rather have you request it. So you can either do it via the website or send it to me. But this group is very much focused on key issues in long-term preservation, data curation, repositories, and it is going to be taking a very, very much more solid look and long-term look at eScience data set and digital asset management going further into the future. And at this next meeting, we'll also be hitting on cloud computing, the discussion of today's presentations. So I've gone over this. If you have any issues, just send them to us. You have a chat capability here. I'm also going to be posting links to all past TA-SIG emails on my blog, since I do know people keep coming back to me asking for past information I've sent out. Today or tomorrow, we will have a new digital library white paper by Mike Keller posted on the TA-SIG website. Please use that. And for many of you who were talking to us about the Honeycomb ST5800 in the past, we do have a collaboration going on with Oxford and Southampton. And that's an open collaboration. If you're interested, definitely contact us. So we do want to foster those type of efforts. So with that, I'd like to introduce Sandy Payette, Executive Director for Fedora Commons, and Michelle Kempton, Executive Director for DSpace Foundation. So, Sandy?
Thanks, Art. I'm trying to just forward the slides here to the next slide. There we go. Okay, well, thanks, Art. And I'd like to thank Sun for working with us on this webinar series. It's a wonderful opportunity, and I'm very pleased with our partnerships with Sun and the DSpace Foundation in terms of making this happen. So the title of the talk that Michelle and I will do today is the DSpace Foundation and Fedora Commons 1 + 1 = 3. And that really is meant to convey the value of individually we can do a lot of great things, but together we can really do more. And there's kind of this amplification of the value when we bring our two organizations and our communities together. So that's kind of our backdrop theme. And I wanted to just give a little bit of history in terms of our reflections on where we've been and where we're going. Since about the year 2000, both DSpace and Fedora entered the field in the digital repository area. And in the beginning, we were pretty much focused on institutional repositories and digital collections as kind of the first use cases for digital repositories. And in fact, both DSpace and Fedora were built very much with these two use cases in mind, but also anticipating a future that was beyond just those two beginning problem areas that we were working on. So I like this metaphor of the wave. That was kind of the first wave of repository-enabled applications. And then after that, the wave got a little bit bigger, a little bit more complexity, a little bit more diversity of content and functions. And I would call that second wave more the digital library wave. And after that, some notion of the kind of collaborative spaces or Web 2.0 overlay on digital libraries, on digital repository-based applications. And in fact, that is still a very active and current wave. We're still riding that. But really, we see the next wave coming, and it's a big one, and it's an exciting wave. And I would characterize that wave as being very focused on the emergence of scholarly and scientific infrastructure, as Art mentioned, e-research and e-science, and the big challenge of data. And that it pertains both to data archiving, but also some of the opportunities for linking data, sharing data, fusing disparate data together to find answers to problems that might not be able to be answered easily without such capabilities of connecting data. So as we look at this history and these waves, we contemplate the implications for our work. And in the area of digital repositories, we realize that our systems need to be framed in a more futuristic way. And we've made the following observations, that as the waves get bigger, we need to think more in terms of repositories as being more part of a distributed infrastructure. We need to think about how repositories fit well into the emerging collaborative spaces. We need to ensure that our repositories work well in the web architecture, that they are web-oriented. They need to be more open, and that's both from a standards standpoint, open standards, but also we are very interested in the theme of open information, open access, and more interoperable to enable them to be components in an emergent infrastructure. Actually, here's a very interesting source. I enjoyed reading the paper that you'll see on the bottom. This was an NSF workshop, and the outcome was this paper that really discusses how infrastructure has emerged in the past, whether it's electrical infrastructure, trains, the Internet itself, and it then tries to assert lessons that we might learn as we build scientific and scholarly infrastructure. And one of the themes that I like to pull out was this notion of a kind of transformative stage where we move from a systems-oriented stage, system-centric view of the world, to more of a network view of the world. And on the systems side, we basically were thinking more in terms of building systems that were integrated components, tended to be a bit more central control for each system. Any gateways between systems tended to be specialized and dedicated, built, from this system to that system as a special case. Generally more closed, often preconceived, whereas we move into more of a network infrastructure perspective, we think in terms of systems and integrating systems. We think of distributed control. We think of generic gateways emerging, more standard gateways, simpler gateways, and more open and reconfigurable. And I believe that as providers of open repository solutions and looking at broader at infrastructure, we really need to think about how we make this transition and how repositories really start to fit into this network perspective. And repositories being one of many systems components that would form scholarly and scientific infrastructure. Okay, I'm waiting for the slide to change here. A little bit of a delay on the slide change. There we go. Okay, so this is a very interesting article that I'll point out. In the December 2008 issue of the Communications of the ACM, there was an article by Francine Berman about data, called Data, but it was really thinking about the preservation challenge before us in the information age as a deluge of data is being collected and stored. And what I wanted to note in here is that both Fedora, Commons, and DSpace were recognized in this article as emerging data cyber infrastructure solutions, management environments, along with others such as LOCKSS and IRODS. And also the observation that commercial storage and services will play an important role in the emerging infrastructure, but they would not be the be-all and end-all to dealing with some of the greater issues around preservation, where a greater level of trust, monitoring, replication, accountability is necessary. And they do note that there is kind of a public good mission around this, and that was really significant for the DSpace Foundation and Fedora Commons as we position as high-tech nonprofits in the space to be able to add that level of trust over some of the commercial components of an emerging infrastructure. A brief history for those who maybe don't know about DSpace and Fedora. These are two open source repository systems. There are others. We note our colleagues who have created the ePrint system in the UK. DSpace and Fedora are similar systems with certain nuance that makes them a bit different. So DSpace is very tuned to an end-user application with the repository turnkey system out-of-the-box experience, whereas Fedora was conceived of more as a web service, kind of a platform that many different types of applications could be built upon. Basically, the core of the platform is a repository with supporting services, and it's intended to be very flexible and modular and scalable. Both technologies are targeted at supporting scholarship, science, culture, education, other key themes, open access, and of course, preservation and archiving. Between the two organizations, we have the largest share of the open repositories worldwide market, if you will. We have over 700 institutions between our two organizations that run our systems. And on the left, you can see we deal with universities, research centers, libraries, archives, cultural heritage institutions, government, and many others. Many of you who have followed the DSpace Foundation and Fedora Commons partnership would be interested to know how the progression of the partnership happened. We are two nonprofit organizations, 501c3 public charity organizations. We began working together about a year ago, exploring common tools. We did some work on the stored deposit API on both of our systems, looking also at certain types of plugins we could share, working with Microsoft on a plugin for Word to deposit stuff into repositories. We then evolved into the next stage of this partnership, which is really a much more serious look at the challenges of interoperability, and we began to explore together web APIs that we could both adopt, storage abstraction architectures, and generally a more longer view of an architectural strategy that we could both abide by. These two stages were extremely successful, and we thus moved on to what is a full partnership endorsed by our boards of directors to really do some much more strategic work together. And that's where DSpace, which will be a highlight of the part of the talk that Michelle will take over in a few minutes, will tell you about that joint project. But also, we're in this partnership looking at the prospect of future joint offerings, coming up with business strategies together to sustain our nonprofit organizations, doing joint communication and outreach programs such as this webinar series. The goals of our partnership, pretty much there are three major areas of this partnership that I would like to focus on. Stewardship. Together, we want to support and sustain Fedora and DSpace, the technologies and the communities, and align the technologies and communities in strategic ways. We want to continue to work together to be keepers of the flame, keepers of the cause, and that's both the notion of durability of content, more of a preservation sensibility, and access to content. And those, that two sides of the coin, we both strongly believe they need to go together. Innovation. We want to think beyond our existing platforms and kind of project into the future together. We want to develop strategic directions together for repositories, but also think of new products and new services that we can offer our communities and new communities together. And ultimately, sustainability. We do want our nonprofits to be healthy and long-lived to fulfill our mission. And together we're working on business model strategies that really fit our sector, and we're looking at services that we can offer that will generate revenue to support the nonprofit mission and to support the sustainability of our open technologies. So in this talk, I'm going to highlight the cloud, and then Michelle is going to go into this in depth with our DSpace proposition. So many people are wondering, what about the cloud? And I thought it would be appropriate to give you a couple of definitions as to what is the cloud. Actually, people are not often sure what it exactly means. If we look at a definition from Gartner that was done in 2008, a style of computing where massively scalable IT capabilities are provided as a service using the Internet to basically provide the service to multiple external customers. Pew Internet had a similar twist, an emerging architecture in which data and applications reside in cyberspace, allowing users to access this by the Internet. Generally, cloud services, the cloud concept is divided into three basic categories. You may have heard these terms. Software as a service. The most popular example of that that I would forward is Google Apps, being able to do mail and documents and spreadsheets running in the cloud, running these applications at the Google data center, and you use them through the Internet. Cloud computing. The dominant example here is the Amazon EC2. That's the elastic compute cloud. And then there's cloud storage, which, again, Amazon has a very popular offering here called S3, Amazon Simple Storage. So basically, we're going to now discuss DSpace. And if we think of everyone's kind of looking up at the cloud, and I want to kind of turn it in a different orientation, and I want to think about if we hover above the cloud, and that's where we position DSpace, we can do some very interesting things to enable some of the vision we've had in distributed repositories, federated repositories, and scholarly siloed infrastructure. And arguably, this could be heaven if we do it right. So I'm going to actually pass to Michelle so she can tell you more about the DSpace proposition.
Thank you, Sandal.
Hi. Let me switch to you. There.
Excellent. So thanks, everyone, for joining the call today. And as Sandy has mentioned, one of the things that we looked at in this collaboration is how do we add value to our communities, both our communities and our future communities that want to basically have a system or an infrastructure for managing their assets, providing access to those assets and preserving them over time. What can we do that we haven't done to our current software platforms? And that's really where the DSpace proposition evolved, was to develop a solution that would give organizations the ability to take advantage of cloud services, but yet with a higher degree of trust and reliability through working through nonprofit partners such as ourselves. There we go. Thanks. Okay, so in the last 4 months, roughly, when we came up with this concept, the DSpace concept, we have gone around and put together several focus groups, site visits, and scoped at many conferences and forums to gather feedback as to what are some of the issues our users are tackling. So across our base of 700, many of these institutions and organizations have been successful getting a repository up and running, getting some content in that repository, but really moving beyond that has been challenging. And it's been challenging in really two areas that we see. One is, other than providing basic access to this content, how do they develop value-added services and more interesting access and aggregation of the content by partnering with other institutions that also have content? And how do they put together a preservation and really implement a preservation strategy for the long term, which is beyond just having an offline backup copy in their own IT environment? So these are two issues that we have seen some common barriers around. So in the preservation, many of the organizations which are running repositories feel that it's important but very difficult to implement. And some of the key factors driving that is that their IT departments are overstretched. So if they go to them and say, hey, we have this repository that you're running, but we want to make multiple copies in multiple geographies and ideally even multiple administrations, the IT department says, well, look, you're lucky that we're even running this for you. And so they, in many cases, throw up their hands because they just don't have the bandwidth to handle it. In some cases, the data centers are currently maxed, so if you want to add storage and server capability, there's really no room to do that. And people are trying to expand their footprint in order to make those changes. In today's economic environment, there have been numerous organizations that we work with where their budgets have been slashed, and as a result, there's been a tightening of capital expenditures. So really being able to expand your server and storage capacity is no longer on the table. And in also many cases, the expertise may be limited. Certainly with the DSpace platform, many times these platforms are being run within a research center or a library environment, and they might not have the expertise to figure out how do I implement a preservation strategy without the help of IT. Those are some of the challenges. The other problem I talked about is being able to provide easy access to all of the content across these multiple repositories and build value-added services upon this content continues to be challenging, and we hear this over and over again at conferences and through papers, and the struggle to really link up all of this content in useful ways for scholars to be able to reuse it effectively. And I think we're all familiar with some of the challenges here. Our current platforms, be it open or closed, DSpace, Fedora, ePrint, and several proprietary platforms are not interoperable today. Obviously, we're working together to change those and to put common APIs and tools in place, but it's not always easy. And then it also has to be implemented on a case-by-case basis for every user to make that part of the landscape. When organizations try and work together to build collaborative collections or to provide value-added services on top of content hosted in different domains, it can be difficult to do because the IT environment that that particular system is operating in. So, for example, if somebody wanted to deposit content in an MIT repository because they're building a subject-specific collection and another university has some of that material that would add value to that collection, it might be very difficult to get through the back door because of authentication systems, identity systems, and just basic IT infrastructure would not allow that to happen. Lack of common standards, obviously, each of these systems has their own APIs and interfaces and protocols and data models, and so that really prevents seamless interoperability. And the last one I'll talk about is inadequate compute capacity. So if you want to run large-scale jobs, such as indexing jobs or processing jobs, you might not have the bandwidth and server capacity within your own organization to actually run those services. The cloud services and the concept of cloud services is probably not new to anyone here because many of us use these services on a personal level. There's webmail, photo sharing, there's online network storage for your laptop or your desktop, and you're probably familiar with some of the big commercial organizations that run these, such as Flickr and Google and Microsoft with Live Mesh, and there's many, many more. So they're becoming really commonplace, particularly for the upcoming generations to basically manage and access all of their content over the internet. For organizations and institutions, there is also an emerging cloud service platform, which is this elastic web-based infrastructure for storage and compute. And the first player to enter that market was Amazon with their web services. So you could basically get storage and compute on the fly as you needed it, and you pay for those services as you go. And there are many more players now entering into the market because Amazon has been so successful. Azure from Microsoft is another service platform, web service-based platform, and there are several others that are emerging. Some of the biggest advantages of a cloud service is really the flexibility and the scalability that it offers. So if you want to grow your data store, you can basically push content into the cloud, and that additional storage capacity is available on demand. So you don't have to buy servers that are specific for your application. It is an elastic and dynamic system, which also then allows you to scale really very easily with almost a one-click interface. And what has made these services in addition successful is that you pay for what you use. So unlike a managed hosting service where you have to pay for a rack or pay for a portion of a rack which you own and then you have a dedicated sysadmin to manage, you just pay for storage and bandwidth as you use it. So it's a very cost-effective way to scale up your organization. And certainly in the case of Amazon, and I see others following suit, they've made it very easy for you to implement this protocol within your existing infrastructure through very easy-to-use APIs. But putting your trusted content in the cloud that you are the steward of does come with its issues, particularly since this is an emerging technology with emerging players. There's the issue of security. How do you know what the protocols are at those commercial providers to ensure that your data is not going to be compromised? So, and that could be anywhere from how is the building secure, who can get into those data centers, to how do you make sure that there's no leak through the back door that people can get access to your data and maybe deface the data that wouldn't be desirable. There's very little transparency into these organizations in terms of knowing what architecture are they running their cloud services on, how often does that architecture migrate or change, what are the protocols they run and the processes for ensuring that the data that they're managing is safe and meeting the expectations. Service level agreements vary across the cloud compute organizations. Typically, we see that they are based on uptime because many of their initial adopters of cloud services were most concerned about their content being exposed around the clock. So there's been very little development of service level agreements for data loss, and typically you find nothing about data loss. Standards, since all of the cloud providers are competitive and it is an emerging market, there has been no evolution of standards to date. And I think this will probably take a long time before you see that because it is growing and emerging. Value-added services, many of the services that have been developed have been specific typically for commercial organizations that are hosting their applications. So in terms of academia, and the organizations that make up our communities, there hasn't been emphasis or focus on services that might be in line with the types of things that they would like to do. And, of course, the big one is trust. In many of these organizations, there is no single individual that you can talk to establish a relationship with, to potentially negotiate services with, to even call if you're unsure of something or something goes wrong. Because they're a very cost-effective, low-touch organization, it's very difficult to build up that trust relationship. So this, when our two organizations got together and said, how can we tackle some of these barriers but yet allow our communities the opportunity to take advantage of some of the features of cloud services, this is where the back of the napkin DSpace concept came out, which is really trusted management of and access to your durable digital assets in the cloud. So in this diagram, on the top are the users. So user, you could be an organization running DSpace, you could be an organization running Fedora, you could even have a different, some other application that you have content in, or even an individual user. And by setting up, by logging on to the DSpace mediating service, you can then push your content from any of these applications or systems or your desktop into a number of cloud services. And those cloud services could be commercial, it could be your local IT, it could be a university fan environment that decided to put some of their servers in the public cloud environment. It could be other nonprofits. So this is the notional concept of you have content somewhere in an application, even on your desktop. You push that content through the DSpace service layer, which then replicates that content to multiple cloud providers so that you have your content in multiple geographies and multiple administrations. That was really the fundamental core proposition. And this is kind of the next, also a notional diagram, but maybe to think more directly how that might relate to you, is if you're a organization using DSpace, organization using Fedora, or any digital asset management application, or a group of individual users, you can go to the DSpace.org website. You can launch your own individual DSpace instance, which is a web-based service, but it's specific to your organization. And then through your DSpace instance, you can push the content that you select that's coming from your organization through DSpace into multiple cloud providers. And we will have preferred providers, but we'll also have providers that you could select based on attributes that you're most interested in. So the core service, the basic premise is preservation-based in terms of there's preservation-based and then there's compute service-based. So let me cover the preservation-based first. This will really is intended to help solve the preservation implementation component that repositories face. So through DSpace, you can replicate your content to multiple storage providers, multiple geographic areas. As we know, multiple administrations, multiple geographies is a good thing in terms of an overall preservation strategy. You can monitor and audit those digital assets through your DSpace web interface. The DSpace hosting organization, which is Fedora and DSpace, on your behalf will manage the partnerships with the service providers and have an ability to aggregate organizations to negotiate special services with those partners and also potentially pass on aggregated lower costs to our network. And, of course, we intend to follow the model developed by the cloud providers, which is you pay for what you use. So you pay for the storages and the services that you use through the DSpace instance. There's no subscription fee. There's no one-time setup fee. It's pay for use. In addition to preservation, we see an opportunity to really build and implement a number of other value-added services. So once you have all of your content in the cloud and others have content in the cloud, you can then run services on top of that content, which may have been difficult within your own IT environment. You can run search services, so for creating large-scale indices, aggregation services across multiple repositories that now have copies of their content in the cloud, streaming services for video, which might have been difficult in your own environment, migration services, so you have one JPEG format, you need to migrate it all to another JPEG format. There could be a service that basically does that migration for you for all your content in the cloud. And in the obvious case, let's say you don't even have a repository set up, but you want to set up a virtual repository, there would be repository images in the cloud that you could then execute to set up your repository completely in the cloud, meaning hosting as well as the replication part of it. Also, by having this capability, it will enable others, not just DSpace and Fedora teams, but others, be it third-party commercial vendors or other nonprofit organizations or academic organizations, to build services and applications in the cloud, and that would be the compute cloud on top of their content. So the use cases, so there's DSpace with cloud storage, which means providing replication across multiple geographies and multiple administrations, a part of your digital archive for text, images, data sets, video, audio, any type of content that you decide to put in there. And then the capability, once you have that storage, is actually to build collaborative collections with others. You can each contribute to your content to the cloud to build common collections. DSpace with cloud compute. So now you have your content in the storage cloud. Adjacent to that, you can run services in the compute cloud. And services, some of which I've talked about, but there are many, many more that you can think of in this scenario. Streaming service for video, JPEG 2000, image engine, indexing, and other heavy processing jobs that you can't run in your own environment. A staging area for repository ingest. In this case, you have multiple scholars and researchers that are out in the field or, in different environments other than within your institution, and they need to deposit content or want to deposit content in a repository, but you can't manage the ingest because it has to go through a certain workflow. Well, they can basically, through a single API, push their stuff into a cloud staging area, which then you can pull it out and ingest it into your repository through the proper workflow. You can run your repository in the cloud. And then you can also use the cloud compute for deploying prototype tools and test implementations on the data that's on the cloud before you migrate it to your primary source repository. We plan on making the DSpace software open source. So the foundation, the DSpace Foundation and the Fedora Commons Foundation will run DSpace as a service. So basically, through the DSpace.org website, you launch a DSpace instance. We then manage the process of pushing that content to the cloud for you. We will have a Chinese menu of value-added services, which you could also run on top of your content. We'll develop the partnerships with the cloud providers. We will represent your best interests collectively. So that's the DSpace service offering. The DSpace software, which is basically which allows you to push content to the cloud, that will be open source. So if you are part of a consortium or a network of universities and you want to run that, on your intranet or you want to run that collectively in a smaller group, you are welcome to do so. And we hope that others will do that so that we can make software more robust and build an open source community around running DSpace networks. So what we think are the critical success factors to the DSpace service and DSpace in general is ease of use. So it really has to be simple so that anyone from a single end user to a large organization can get it up and running quickly and easily with their existing applications. That we, the foundations, are really a trusted partner for organizations using DSpace to provide that extra sense of that layer on top of these cloud provider services. That DSpace is cost effective, so it has to really be a pay-for-use model, which is based off of what the cloud providers are currently charging. That it offers the same benefits of scalability and flexibility that the cloud providers offer. So in other words, we're just passing on those benefits. We're not hampering them in any way. And that we can establish key strategic partnerships with these service providers so that we can actually, down the road, influence behavior and negotiate effectively for the collective community. So the timeline for DSpace is that we have been talking to service providers and have started to go down the road of developing the strategic partnerships. We have identified pilot partners. So in the summer, we intend to run the first DSpace pilot. This will be a beta release of where we have partners with real data, which are pushing content into the cloud through a DSpace instance. We've already gone through defining the requirements. We're working on and designing the prototype for the pilot. We will pick the pilot partners and service providers in May and begin the pilot this summer. After we have run through the pilot, assuming all is successful, our goal is to launch the service by the end of the year, where we would open it up to everybody. I just want to recognize for both organizations some of the key funders that have helped us get this far, and this is not just for DSpace, but it's for Fedora, DSpace, and the DSpace collaboration. MIT and HP Labs. For DSpace, the Moore Foundation is a very big supporter and funder for Fedora Commons. Andrew Mellon Foundation has supported both our organizations as well as NSF, and of course many, many, many community supporters, not just in funding but also in-kind contributions. If you want to hear more about the collaboration, there is a podcast that was done by Talis, and I know it's not a very attractive link, but you can click on that, and it's an hour-long podcast that talks about all of the things I did today, that the two of us certainly talked about today, but even in more detail. Okay, so thanks very much for listening, and we are now hoping that we can answer some questions.
Michelle, Sandy, I want to thank you both for doing an excellent job, and I thought it was very informative. So with that, we have our time is yours, everybody. So let's open up for phone calls, if the operator can do that, and for chat.
Thank you. If you do have a question, please press *1. Please unmute your phone and record your name clearly when prompted. Your name is required to introduce your question. To withdraw your request, press *2. One moment, please, for the first question. Question comes from Ryan Shirley. Your line is open.
Hi, I'm wondering what the relationship will be between DSpace and the iRods project.
Okay, this is Sandy. I'll answer that, and then Michelle will probably want to add to this. Okay. So actually both the DSpace Foundation and Fedora Commons, we were actually in discussions and collaborations with iRods in terms of how we can integrate iRods into our existing repository architectures. And this, this discussion will obviously evolve into, and how does DuraSpace play with those integrations? And so I don't have the specific answer, but indeed we are in discussions with iRods to come up with a strategy on how all of these technologies work nicely together. Michelle, would you like to add?
Yeah, I would just say that iRods potentially will provide a greater degree of policy management and security than we would ever offer with DuraSpace. So there is a potential linkage between the two for parts of our community that want that extra policy management security that we're not going to offer.
And to speak for Sun, we intend to be working, intensely with the iRods people going forward on hardware and software issues.
I do not show any further questions at this time.
Hi, this is Colleen. We did get a couple questions online. We did get a question from Al Gonzalez, and his question reads, is Pine Online a collection or library in Fedora?
So the Hein Online work, this was done by Rich Marissa. I believe that's the work that's being referred to. And there has been, Fedora work in Rich's whole area. I can't answer right now if actually that particular offering is backed by Fedora, but Rich Marissa would be the person that you could get that answer from. And he's at Cornell CIT, Computing and Information Technologies.
Okay, we have another question from Ben Listener. He wants to know, is their open source available now?
So Michelle, would you like to pick that up from the timeline discussion?
Yeah, the open source will be available, I believe, after the pilot. Right now there's a small team that's working on the DuraSpace software itself. That's what Ben is referring to.
Yeah, it's under development, and we're pressing hard to get that first iteration of it out. Our intent is, of course, since it will be open source, to attract a community of developers around it as quickly as possible. So if anyone is interested in contributing to this kind of effort in an open source way, please contact us. And again, it's that first iteration, the core team is pushing to just get that in a position where it can be tested and then bring others into the fold.
Great. A couple more questions from the chat. We have one from Peggy Furman. She wants to know if you can share your pilot partners with her.
Yeah, not yet. We will share them when we are all ready to go public with the pilot, but we're still talking to several candidates, and we need to go through a selection process. So at this stage, we can't share them.
Another question from Monica Levinson. The first question was from librarians today. What about copyright?
Okay, so the DuraSpace, in order to keep this very simple, there'll be two ways in which you can push your content to your through DuraSpace to the cloud providers, and you can make it dark or you can make it open. And if you choose to have access privileges on your content, then you will do that through your primary application. So the repository will then allow access to the content as the primary source, and it will not be through the cloud providers.
Yes, and this is Sandy. I'd like to add to that. So what we are trying to do is to keep those responsibilities in the institutions that are responsible, for, in this case, ensuring that copyright is respected in the proper way. And so we are trying to be neutral in terms of the content that comes in, but this notion that, as Michelle said, by our permitting the administrator of your, say, DSpace instance to say, okay, this content is dark. What that would mean is that certainly there's still a way into it, and that would be through your administrative identity. And then you can build applications on top that do finer-grained authentication and authorization. And this is a very similar pattern to what we even see in Fedora and DSpace type installations where, the applications are the trusted accessor, or that identity is what DSpace would say, aha, I recognize this identity, but then the finer-grained stuff is done at the level above us.
Okay, we've got 2 more questions. Next question is from Wally First. His question is, what percentage of DSpace installs are pressed for computer power or storage space?
I guess I'll answer that one. I don't have a precise number. I'm through Sandy and I have talked to, I'd say collectively, 125 or so organizations through the conferences and the forums and the site visits and the focus groups. And in those audiences, there have been significant numbers of folks that said they were out of storage or couldn't get additional storage due to budgetary reasons, and also were having problems running large-scale compute cluster jobs just because they didn't have parallel processing racks within their institution. I couldn't give you an exact percentage. This is just a general consensus among the group.
Yes, and I'll add to that. A number of kind of patterns emerged where there were institutions, as Michelle said, that were kind of hitting capacity on their own data center space or their own server space. The other observation was made that there are a lot of small organizations, whether they're small nonprofits, small archives, that basically don't really have much infrastructure. If they don't have infrastructure, they don't have IT staff to manage it, and they're kind of left hanging. And also a lot of grant-funded projects that require infrastructure to really, do the goal of the project. It's an ordeal to kind of build that up. So we have this notion that for those kinds of cases too, it suggested that this could be almost like a instant infrastructure for those who don't even have it. And then, of course, we have all the scenarios of organizations feeling pressed on their capacity already.
Okay, a couple more questions. Lucy asks, what percentage of organizations are using DSpace and Fedora?
Okay, the question again was what percentage of organizations are using DSpace or Fedora?
Yeah,
both.
Of which organizations? I'm trying to get a refinement on the question.
Well, between the organizations that are running both platforms, we've identified roughly 30 that are running both DSpace and Fedora, and we've had numerous others come to us and say we're running one or the other, but we want to install both because of some of the capabilities. So we see that trend emerging as opposed to decreasing.
Okay. On to the next question. The next one is from Jennifer Merrill. Will Fedora or DSpace users need a new version of DSpace or Fedora in order to use DSpace?
Well, we certainly will be providing adapters in our latest versions of Fedora for DSpace. And in each platform, in terms of how far, back, in terms of backward compatibility we will go, we'll make that as a kind of pragmatic decision based on how highly used the previous version is. And if it, seems to be of a great value for people to kind of put it in previous versions as opposed to the latest version. But, our goal is to make this an easy step forward for existing Fedora and DSpace users to be able to snap in the DSpace adapter.
Right. And right now, there already is a plugin, I think there already is one for DSpace, and I think Fedora as well, that pushes content into cloud service providers. So, of course, we will have to build a different extension for DSpace, but this should be an easy adaptation to the current platforms.
Okay, the questions keep streaming in. Next one is from Jessica Salati. Her question is there any rough estimate of cost per terabyte, for example, from cloud storage providers we could begin to consider in the pay-for-use model or compared to replication cost formulas like loss or meta archive?
So I'll take a first cut, and then Michelle can jump in. I mean, the current prices, say for the Amazon S3 service, are actually published, and you can go and look at those. What we're trying to do as part of our planning phase for DSpace, we did get a grant from the Mellon Foundation to do some of this work on the analysis of the pricing models, and one of the things we will publish is the outcome of that analysis. And Michelle, I don't know if you want to add anything more to that.
Yeah, I mean, the one of the reasons that the cloud is so attractive is that they are operating down in the 10 to 15 cents per gigabyte per month of storage, which is typically orders of magnitude lower than most of the cost that an internal IT operation would be if you actually are exposed to those costs. So the DSpace service, of course, will be building on those types of costs, or we'll be aggregating those costs depending on how many providers you push your content to, and then there'll be a cost for the services that you use. And we need to build out what that full cost model will look like, but this is just to give you an idea of the order of magnitude we're talking about.
Okay, next question comes from Kyle Fenton. How will you overcome trust issues that currently exist with most cloud storage providers? For example, Amazon S3 providing no warranty that your content will be there tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is an excellent question. Yes. Right at the core of the DSpace proposition. So one thing that we're doing is, we're in a mediating position, or almost a broker-like position, to work with a network of providers. The first move is there's a certain diversification of the different providers. So you can basically have the trust that the loss of any one isn't the loss of your whole solution for your durable content. Actually, what's very interesting is the emerging cloud players, and we have had meetings with these, in addition to Amazon, the other emerging players. They're positioning in different ways, and without naming the specific ones, I've observed that one of them is positioning around kind of the open, transparent value proposition, open standards, open cloud architecture. So that's very interesting. Another is actually positioning to provide very strong service level agreements that would include data loss. And so our vision is that we can get the requirements from our users in terms of how much safety they need, or how much we need to kind of crank up the dial on trust for data loss, for instance, and direct those customers at the appropriate providers. And so we have both the relationships with these providers and the knowledge to look into their systems, or to have particular types of knowledge in terms of that we can help you get to providers that increase trust.
Okay, our next question comes from Yi Yu, and her question is DSpace different from Fedora and DSpace? Or will it keep current features or API features? If we start to use DSpace with Fedora, will we be able to use the current version for future use of DSpace?
All right. So DSpace is a whole new entity. It's a whole new service. It will have its own APIs and interfaces. And the intent is that it can be used with Fedora, with DSpace, where if you have built applications, on Fedora, or if you're using DSpace, behind the scenes, those Fedora and DSpace will know how to contact DuraSpace and interact with DuraSpace. So it will be kind of an integration, and we'll provide that as an out-of-the-box capability. But DuraSpace itself can also stand on its own. So it can be used by, applications, users that have nothing to do with Fedora DSpace. So it kind of can also stand on its own, and that's our intent, that it can span a much wider set of use cases.
And not to be confused with DuraSpace does not replace Fedora or DSpace. It is not a repository application at all. It is a web service which allows you to seamlessly push your content from not only Fedora application or the DSpace application or other data asset management applications into the cloud. And then once you have your content in the cloud, DuraSpace can also be used to create value-added services to run on top of those assets stored in the cloud.
Okay, next question comes from Felicity Snyder. The question is, if projects are trying to think ahead about cost and estimates, is there any sense of what use charges will look like? For example, where you are saying pay for use as you go?
So this is kind of related to the previous question, that one of the things that we're working on is an analysis of the cost models that we can then, provide that to people. Kind of a sidebar, there also a related concern that has come up in some of our focus groups would be, how do we even budget for this? I mean, what if we, have a limited budget and we put stuff out there and all of a sudden, whoa, the costs start piling up. So we're devoted to providing the cost monitoring capabilities in the DuraSpace service, and even having features where you could set if the cost hits a certain level, we need to kind of shut the service off or scale down, or various options what people can do if things are going over projected. But this is a very important aspect of the business model, and again, that's something Michelle and I are working on, and we've had some others in our community give some very interesting analyses around cost and for existing costs in the current infrastructures they're working in. That will be very valuable for comparison points.
Yeah, I guess the key point is it's something that we're working on, but also that one of the biggest critical success factors is that we keep in line with a very cost-effective solution and pay as you go. So it's one of the drivers.
Right, absolutely.
Okay, next question comes from Mr. Mark Evans. He actually has two. First one is, have you put any thought into the criteria for service providers to be able to advertise themselves as a trusted provider? And secondly, his question is, any thoughts on the governance model for this?
Okay. So the idea of the trusted, advertising themselves as a trusted provider. Clearly our notion is that we can make the assertion through, DuraSpace as these are our trusted providers, and that means that we've done proper due diligence with them to be able to expose why we make that assertion. There's another interesting twist you have here is then can they advertise themselves? If we say it, they can say it. It's one of those things. So if they were saying it without our endorsing it, that would not be legitimate. For thoughts on the governance model, Michelle, do you want to pick that one up, or should I continue?
Well, I just have a comment on the trusted provider. I mean, part of the way that trust is being built with the community is that your DuraSpace is being run by the nonprofit organizations who are mission-centric in terms of preserving content and providing durability to that content over time. So we're not a commercial provider. We are mission-centric with what many of our communities, organizations want for this content. So the trust really comes in being able to seamlessly distribute and provide you the tools to manage this distributed content cost effectively, and then monitoring that and continually managing that for you as a central nonprofit organization. And that if our partners are not doing what they have said they will do, then they then come off of our network and we find other partners to replace them. So we'll probably never get into a situation where we'd say, you know, yes, this is a trusted provider and you can use solely them, because then that really is out of the bounds of the whole concept of DSpace.
Right. It's like a chain of trust thing. I mean, we're the front of the chain, and then, you know, basically you trust us, and then we can kind of inform you about what's behind us.
Right. So we can never guarantee that, say, one of those commercial providers didn't go out of business. What we can do is say we can act on your behalf. If they do go out of business, we will get all your content replicated to another provider without you even necessarily having to know about it.
Okay. Next question comes from Mr. Kyle Fenton again. And his question is, are you in any form of discussion with Happy Trust?
So we mentioned that we've been meeting with a variety of, you know, potential partners, potential users, and in fact, the head of this, John Logan, is on our list, and we will be having discussion.
Yeah, the Happy Trust is different than the DSpace proposition in that they are going to build a central repository for books that have been digitized by Google. So they have a very specific mission at hand where we're not trying to build a central repository. We're trying to enable our communities to use cloud services for replication and digital asset management, not limited by any content, whether it's books, and not having to be in any central repository infrastructure.
Okay, next question from King Powell. Will DSpace provide a mechanism to easily integrate the user institution's local computing disk space as one of the redundant storage computing nodes in the cloud so that they can maintain synced local copies and processing?
Yes, that is definitely the intent. The idea would be that in that case, your local store might be your primary store, and then the DSpace replication might be redundant copies. But I think you see that in both of the diagrams, the notional diagrams that we had in the slide pack. This notion of local store is definitely in there.
So we hope to have a component for the individual researcher or scholar that has something on their desktop and they want to get it replicated to the cloud network. And so a mechanism they can do that from a browser interface. So that is part of the goal.
Okay, great. Two more questions. Jennifer Merrill asks, will DSpace attempt to maintain centralized metadata to facilitate cross-IR searching?
So that, as is expressed there, I wouldn't say that we will be maintaining centralized metadata. There will be a certain amount of metadata that's central to just being able to run the system. However, you might have noted in Michelle's slide about the added value services, we can envision providing indexing and searching service capabilities in the compute cloud. So in a way, the depositing of metadata packages through the DSpace instance could then, those metadata packages could actually then be indexed in that particular scenario. But I wouldn't describe it as a central metadata repository for cross-IR searching. Although we are interested in services that permit, cross DSpace instance discovery. And so, this one, it depends. This one has some architectural nuance to it that I think we could delve into offline if you wanted to pursue this question more.
Yeah, I'll just type in a thing here. I mean, this is really where the opportunity lies with DSpace. And this means, now you have a replication of your content in the cloud, and you can start setting up value-added services. a centralized metadata cross-search would be an example of a value-added service that you could run if there was enough demand and desire across content in the cloud. And we see many opportunities in line with this. And it doesn't mean that we, DSpace Organization Service, has to run those, but we can help facilitate the running of those by having, by enabling you to run those services.
Okay, next question, again from Mr. Kyle Fenton. Will it be possible to mix local and cloud storage in the same Fedora or DSpace installation? In other words, a get your feet wet hybrid approach?
So if we imagine the plugin that we keep talking about, we do have some work going on currently in the Fedora and DSpace technical teams around a shared storage abstraction layer that has this notion of multiple plugins. And if you had observed any of our presentations on that, one of the code names for it in the Fedora, on the Fedora side is a Kubra. So the idea is you can plug in your local file system as plugin 1, but you can also plug in S3, and Fedora in this case would keep the two in sync. So that pattern we've already experimented with, and indeed we intend to bring it forward into the DSpace world here as we evolve that pattern in this particular context. So it could be that the plugins might look like local store DSpace is plugin 2, which then opens up this whole network of replication and redundancy.
Okay, a couple more questions here. From Geneva Henry, if a repository starts using DSpace for cloud storage, will there be an exit strategy in place to allow that repository to stop using the cloud storage and retain their content?
So in the DSpace offering, unless you are hosting your repository in the cloud, which would be a value-added service, if you are running your DSpace or Fedora repository, you would always have the primary copy of your content being accessed and managed through your own repository offering. The cloud storage would only be replications of that data. So you'd always retain your content through your primary store, which is your own repository or application.
I wonder if some people have wondered if they said, gee, we want to run a Fedora and we just want to use Cloud Store, which is a legitimate pattern that could be done. In that case, the DSpace store becomes, the primary store, and then that would be the case, Geneva, where there needs to be an exit strategy, which is to kind of dump the stuff into a local repository. But the good news is that the basic architecture of what we have to build to replicate the content in the first place in DSpace is the same thing that would be necessary to then also replicate it to a local store, given that you had only a DSpace plugin, which, is, again, may not be what many people are thinking of doing in repositories, but people have observed that indeed they could just have the cloud. That would, there's some debate as to when and why you'd want to do it that way.
Okay, next one comes from Jennifer Merrill again. Will DSpace users pay a service fee to the DSpace Foundation of Fedora Commons? And then, will the DSpace service offering have a business model that makes itself self-supporting?
Yes, there will be a fee paid. It would be paid, whether it goes to the DSpace service or the DSpace Fedora Foundation. The intent is that you pay for the DSpace service. The DSpace service that's being run by the two of them. I guess by implication, it comes under the umbrella of DSpace Foundation Fedora Commons as the nonprofit. But the intent is that what you pay is to pay for the service that you're using, and that is a piece of the self-sustaining business model for the DSpace service. There are other dimensions of that.
part of the revenue is what you pay, and then we hope to have other pieces of it which deal with potentially corporate in-kind or sponsorship. That's yet to be developed. But there will be a business model around the service which makes it sustainable and self-supporting.
Okay, great. And we're down to our last question from EU. How does DSpace supply technical metadata service?
So I'm trying to interpret that question. How do we supply a technical metadata service? This could be a variation of what I described earlier, where if there's technical metadata, say around an image collection, presumably this metadata itself could be content that would be pushed into the DSpace instance. And then given that it's stored, services can be built to search that metadata or to use it in various ways. For instance, maybe it's preservation-oriented metadata too. Services could be built to kind of detect it, open it up, pop it open, and use it for a migration service or something like that.
Okay. I just have one last announcement to all the registrants of our webinar today. An email will be sent to you with a URL to the archived playback of this webinar. So I really do appreciate everybody calling and participating on this call today. And a PDF of the presentation will also be posted on the Fedora Commons and Facebook website.
And this is Art. I want to thank everybody for the questions, and thanks Sandy and Michelle for their contributions. I think this is a great project. And lastly, I will be publishing, as some cloud computing information comes out that deals with things like cost models and scalability models, I'll be publishing some of that via the PaySig. So if you want to get on, I just received a bunch of emails directly. If you want to get on the Preservation Archive Special Interest Group mailing list, just shoot me an email, art.pasquin@art.com. And one question, quick one, Michelle and Sandy. Are you guys going to be traveling internationally? There's a lot of international callers. Are there any events you're going to be at that you want to advise people about where they can link up with you?
So of course, the POSIG, it's not on our turf here, so we're going to be over there for that.
Open repositories will probably
Open repositories, of course.
Okay.
That's the big one, and that's in the U.S. And actually, that would be a wonderful event if anyone hasn't registered and would like to check it out. Open Repositories 2009. If you Google for it, it's in Atlanta in May. Excellent event to attend.
Great. Well, thank you both, and thank everybody
Thank you,
who's been listening.
Thank you, Art.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.